Hello, everyone. Hope you're able to hear me. Thank you for joining in for this webinar today offered by Nordic Blockchain Association and Partisia. The webinar is about PETs, privacy enhancing technologies, and it's a continuation of a series of articles run together with Nordic Blockchain Association and Partisia on using privacy enhancing technologies and blockchain applied to different industries such as healthcare, the public sector, and the financial industry. So I would encourage everyone to listen in and add questions in the chat. We will have a panel discussion here with Partisia, and then at the end we will have some time for Q&A, and we will take all the different questions from the chat. So I'll encourage you to use the chat function on X or LinkedIn. So let's get started. I would like you to get to know Anas Dalsko and Søren Thompson, both cryptography engineers from Partisia. Hope you're able to hear me. Anas and Søren, give me a sign. Yes. Let me see if I don't know if the mic is working on your side.
Let's see.
Yeah, now it's working. Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you. Can you hear us now?
Yeah. Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, I mean, as you said, we're both cryptographic engineers at Partisia. I've worked here for 4 years, close to 4 years now. So you've worked for
slightly less, I think 1.5 years.
1.5 years. And yeah, I mean, we do cryptographic engineering, I suppose, which is, I guess it's, we engineer things that has to do with cryptography, engineer things. We solve problems with cryptography. I guess that's the cleanest way to describe what we do in our day-to-day. And I mean, we're super excited to be here to talk about this sort of like intersection between PETs, or like privacy enhancing technologies, and blockchains, because I think it's a pretty cool combination. Works very well, which hopefully we can get into a bit more, I guess, later.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add is that we both come from academia, in the sense that we have a PhD in cryptography from Aarhus University, and now we've sort of made the transition into industry, trying to bring this latest research from academia into real life use cases.
Yeah, so the transition from academia to real life, I guess. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for the intro, guys. And we will have probably a diverse crowd, and people. We will have probably people who understand cryptography more than others, people who understand blockchain. But for sure, privacy enhancing technologies are not an easy topic to understand. So, and you guys are probably the best to explain it in simple terms. So I would say let's dive into it and start by explaining maybe to everyone here what are actually PETs.
So PETs, or privacy enhancing technologies, is I mean, it's what they are. It's technologies that enhance privacy, and privacy in this context is privacy of data in some sort, whether that be for storage or for transport or for use. I think the classical privacy enhancing technologies, I would say, are for the first two categories, so for storage and for transport. So, for example, classical encryption is a privacy enhancing technology because it allows you to store data on an insecure medium without worrying that this data will be leaked. Right? I can encrypt it and then I can store it somewhere. And similarly, like transport layer security, like TLS, for example, allows you to transport data from A to B without worrying that somebody is going to pick up on it on the way. But I think for this particular webinar, and what we will be talking more about, is like privacy enhancing technologies that has to do with so somehow securing data while it's being used. So the former two just allows me to either store data or transport data, but as soon as I have to use it, I sort of have to reveal all the data to whoever it needs to use it. But there's a lot of, especially recently, the last 10 years or so, new technologies that have been made practical that actually allows you to keep to actually process the data, to use the data while still keeping it private in some sense.
I guess in some sense, privacy is very easy, right? Don't collect data, don't share data, don't use data.
Yeah.
Then you have solved the problem pretty much. So I think putting emphasis on using the data while preserving the privacy of the individuals providing the data. I think that's a nice way to see these privacy enhancing technologies, right?
Yeah. And I think the ones we'll be getting into in particular is this one called secure multi-party computation, or MPC for short. But there's of course also the other pets that show up more and more, such as like zero knowledge proof systems and fully homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, for example. All of these sort of allow you to use data while maintaining some notion of privacy, which of course means that you can sort of have your cake and eat it too in some sense, which is what it's all about, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, privacy enhancing technologies are some sort of advanced cryptography, right, compared to the cryptography that we had some years back. And as you have mentioned, a few homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge proofs, those are familiar terms for the people maybe. But could you before diving into the multi-party computation, which is what you mainly use at Partisia, could you try to explain the difference between multi-party computation, zero knowledge proof, and this group of privacy enhancing technology? So which pets do you see as the most prominent? Because especially in the blockchain space, everyone talks about zero knowledge proof. So are they actually, is that better than multi-party computation? How do they differ? Can you please explain us a little bit the difference between those?
So I think personally, I don't think there is necessarily such a thing as one privacy enhancing technology that is better than another. There are some that are more suitable for certain applications than others. But I think before then, it might be a good idea to just give like a sort of high level intuition about these different technologies, and maybe focus on zero knowledge proof systems, fully homomorphic encryption, and of course secure multi-party computation, which are sort of like the three big ones in some sense. And also three technologies that each have their own like trade-offs and their own pros and cons. So which maybe, at least if you understand them, also allows you to sort of compare them. So I think, for example, starting with zero knowledge proof systems, which are, as you mentioned, very popular in the Web3 space in blockchains. It's essentially a way for me, or for what is typically called the prover, but let's just say for the sake of examples, say me, that I can prove something towards you without revealing how I might necessarily know this thing. So an example that I remember being used in lectures at the university is that, and which I guess makes sense if you're Danish, is that maybe I can claim that I can taste the difference between Tuborg and Carlsberg. I don't want to reveal how I can do it, but I claim that I can. And now a zero knowledge proof system is some sort of protocol that will allow me to convince you, typically called the verifier, that I actually know how to taste the difference between these two beers. And I can convince you without revealing my super secret technique. And this you can do with advanced cryptography. Of course, claiming to be able to taste the difference between two beers is a bit silly. So for example, in a blockchain application, what you might use it for is to say that I claim that I have like a certain amount of cryptocurrencies or assets tied to my account, but I don't want to reveal the actual number or maybe even what my account is. I just claim that I control an account, and this account has 1 million Danish kroner in it, for example. And now I can use a zero knowledge proof system to actually convince you in like a strong cryptographic sense that this is true, without ever revealing my account or the amount of money in it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so the latter form of zero knowledge proof you referred to here, when used in a blockchain setting, that's often referred to as a non-interactive zero knowledge proof, right? Because it's really just a single piece of text convincing the verifier that this is in fact the statement holds, if it holds, right? That's the only way that you can produce this piece of text.
And that is, and that is something exactly that's also how, as a non-technical person actually understand zero knowledge proof, and it makes sense, of course. Maybe I don't know exactly how this is set up within blockchain, but I'm not a builder either. But if you want to take zero knowledge proof and compare it to multi-party computation, for example, how does that differ? Like, would you use it in the same way, apply to blockchains, for example?
So it's interesting because you can use secure multi-party computation for the same things as you can use a zero knowledge proof system, but the other way doesn't necessarily works always. And the reason for it is that a zero knowledge proof system is, well, it's a proof system. It allows me to convince you of something, which means that in the end, you get a result that says, yes, you're convinced, or no, you're not convinced. So the result is always going to be yes or no. Secure multi-party computation, or fully homomorphic encryption for that matter, are computation technologies. So whereas for a zero knowledge proof system, I can convince you, for example, that I earn more than, let's say, a million kroners, or that, let's say, I can convince you that Patricia earns more than a certain amount of money every year, has that in revenue. Fully homomorphic encryption or secure multi-party computation, for those will be able to tell you, for example, the average income of employees in Patricia, without having to leak like the individual person's income. So it sort of goes beyond, in the sense that now you can compute anything, and you can get any output, I guess. Which of course means you can still do a computation where the output is like yes or no, just like with a zero knowledge proof. But a zero knowledge proof is only ever yes or no, whereas a secure multi-party computation is more general in that sense.
Okay, so it enables basically more complex computations compared to
Yes.
zero knowledge proof, where it's basically a yes or no. So it probably enables also to compute faster in a way, and get to a final result faster, which is more complicated than what zero knowledge proof can actually solve, as I understanding. But we can go on for a long time regarding the cryptography and the technical setup of these different pets. But what is interesting really here, and what probably most of the listener would like to hear, is how do you actually apply pets or multi-party computation specifically within the industry? So what are the different applications, if you can name a few of the industry and sectors for those who have not read the articles before?
So I think it's for me, it's also useful to distinguish between these different technologies, comparing them on the setting to which they apply, right? So secure multi-party computation, that's about computing on distributed sensitive data, right? So I would like some kind of computation result on data that is distributed across parties, which cannot just exchange the data, because that will really reveal the underlying sensitive data, right? This makes it's very useful for when for example, wanting to do statistics across distributed databases, but also just to match, say order matching when doing auctions, that kind of stuff. Because there you really have different parties knows their bids and selling prices, and now you can compute which matches and only reveal those where there's a match, not revealing all those aside from that.
Yeah,
so basically, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, like, it really is a technology that shines in use cases where there's like many parties and they can't necessarily agree on somebody who should do the work for them. So, for example, an auction between many mutually distrustful parties, or let's say statistics, as Søren mentioned, on databases, for example, located at different hospitals who are not willing to share patient data, or like maybe even cannot share patient data because of certain regulations that tell them they're not allowed to. And then MPC sort of allows you to share this data and do a computation on it while in some sense not really sharing it at all, since each of the hospitals still remain in control of their own data.
Yeah, so basically multi-party computation creates trust, intrinsic trust in the system, where you don't have trust between two parties, such as with the different applications of blockchain in this case. But this can be built together with blockchain, right? So can it live alone, or how does blockchain here specifically support multi-party computation? Just to make sure we understand it, we get it right.
Right. So I mean, they can live alone. I mean, MPC can live alone on its own. A blockchain can live alone on its own. But I think they really complement each other. MPC is a technology that, it maybe a little bit formally, it says that there is a bunch of people. They are all in agreement about doing some sort of computation, statistics, order matching, auction, whatever sort of thing. And everybody knows each other. They all agree on what they need to compute, and then they can compute it. That's sort of what an MPC is. But in practice, this is not easy to do. It's not easy to get everybody to agree on it, even if they sort of beforehand, we have a loose group of people. They are all like, we would like to, we would like to run an auction. That might work well in English. It doesn't work very well in a computer language. You sort of have to be a little bit more precise in order to get these computers run by the different people to actually do anything meaningful. And moreover, you also need to be able, like everybody needs to coordinate, when do we start? Who's allowed to participate? And possibly you also want to actually track this system when it's being used. You want to see that now it actually started, now it's running. Now it stopped. Maybe some people had IT issues and so on. And all of these things are things that you do absolutely need in like a real system, but which secure multi-party computation does not deal with at all. And these are issues that you can actually solve with a blockchain. So they complement each other very nicely. It's like MPC gives you maybe the privacy aspect of it, but they don't give you any of like the transparency and the orchestration, the organizing, and access controls and all of these other things.
That's very well explained, yeah. And I think it makes sense, and also with the specific use case that you briefly mentioned about auctions. But maybe now really diving into the real use cases. We would like to hear you at Partisia. Where are you actually using multi-party computation? And you mentioned briefly healthcare before, and statistics. Can you name, like, can you explain a few examples here where you have used the multi-party computation in Partisia?
Yes, so I think one very nice example is the case of what we call the virtual public registers. So this is a case where we use multi-party computation to do statistics on two distributed databases. In particular, we calculate on the databases from the system is set up in such a way that we can calculate on the databases from the Danish health authorities and on the Statistics Denmark's information, right? So in one of the databases, we have a lot of information about income and sort of demographic information about the population, right? And in the other database, there's a lot of information about the outcome of health treatments and so on and so forth, right? So naturally, putting these two databases together, I mean, that would really violate the privacy of each individual, right? Then someone would be able to sit down and really sort of see, hey, this person who earns this much, maybe even the CPR number, everything, they have this disease or whatever. So instead, what we do is to make these virtual public registers where you can actually do research based on demographic information and relate this to health information. And now you can compute sort of whether there is a dependency on the income and whether there's whether the chance that you will have a certain disease grows, right? So I think this is a very nice application, actually allowing you to find relationships in data that you wouldn't be possible to infer otherwise.
Yeah.
This is very interesting, and as I hear matching, or you can say cross-checking the statistical information and the disease and the conditions from patients, that will be very, very important for example, public players to develop healthcare policies and so on. But who else can actually make use of this data? Like, where do you see can this be valuable for me as a patient, for example? What do I get out of it? Or who do you see as the main customers or users of this information?
So I think that depends, of course, on who ends up using it, using the system. But I'd like to imagine that now there's access to more data in virtually in some sense, because you can compute on this data without actually having to sign very lengthy, complicated NDAs or go through all kinds of screening processes. You still have to do them, but they hopefully are like easier to go through now, which means that it enables like better discovery, for example, of medicine or treatment plans for patients, because you simply have more data about what potentially works or doesn't work, because you can now link data. And of course, so the VPR goes across 2 Danish instances, but there's no reason for this to not be able to scale across multiple hospitals, even potentially across countries also in Europe, for example.
Yeah, so I think a natural extension of this system is to also allow producers of medicine to do medical trials, right? When developing new medicine, then they need to compare how the medicine affects a population, and compare this to how the population otherwise would have done, right? And the normal procedure there is to do these randomized control arms, such that really you do a big study and compare this sort of these 2 arms against each other, right? One who receives the treatment and one who does not. But this is a very expensive thing to do, because it requires a lot of patience and the right groups. And another approach is to compare the group of patients receiving the treatment to already existing historical records of real-world data, right? But this is no easy feat to find this data and make it available, because it requires a lot of data to find matching patients.
This data is very sensitive, right, because it's like patient data.
Right. And now, if you have access to such a virtual public register, maybe even across countries, pulling together many of these health records, then this process can be made quite a bit cheaper and simpler, and this will in the end benefit also the patients themselves, right?
For sure, and I can tell you that real-world data is very important, both for manufacturers, research institutes, universities, to scale treatments and to also find new treatments for patients as well. So yeah, it's definitely a key pain point here that we can solve. Maybe one question would be here regarding regulations. So is because of course, as you said, when we talk about electronic health recourse or clinical data, patient data, there's a lot of regulations here. So how do you ensure that actually multi-party computation follows the existing regulations, especially, for example, in Europe or in the US? Or are there any can say limitations of use in specific regions where the regulations can be a challenge, for example?
So I think regulation is it's always a tricky question. There's no such thing as for example, GDPR compliant encryption or algorithms or something like that. You always have to have a data protection officer, I think is the right term, to look at the use case. You always have to make an assessment about whether this now makes sense. But what it does give you is that it gives you a way to sort of this term called data minimization, just like encryption does. So in the same sense that just because I encrypt data doesn't necessarily mean that now I can use it for analysis, because I still have to argue that why, I still have to have a legal basis for using it and so on. Same, of course, also applies for MPC. But MPC does allow you to, minimize access to data, make sure that it's only for this particular purpose that you do gain access to it. So it's for sure it is a tool that works very well in this whole privacy space when it comes to regulation, and it is something that is being used more and more. It's still sort of in its early stages when it comes to being used in real systems, but it is getting there, and that's very important for for the non-technical people to really see that this is actually a tool that can be used for systems where there is a need for privacy because of GDPR, for example, compliance, or a need for GDPR compliance with respect to GDPR.
Okay, so I mean, we're still in early stages, but there's a great potential. And of course, we can see already some applications that are already live in productions, especially with Partisia and some of the partners that you have mentioned before. Now, moving a little bit away from the healthcare and clinical data, that is also a very regulated industry, but moving into another very regulated industry. I know that NPC also has important applications within the financial industry and the payments. What can you tell us about the application of NPC there?
So for sure, and I think banking finance is another one of those areas where you have multiple mutually distrustful parties that nevertheless sort of have to work together. So whereas in healthcare, it's like hospitals, if they work together, you get better treatment, you get better medicine, and so on. For banks, they sort of need to work together to make sure that people are not using the systems to launder money, for example, or to commit cross-institutional financial fraud and so on. Which sort of creates a bit of a headache, I guess, for banks, because on the one hand, they need to have these measures in place, like this anti-money laundering rules and so on. But the other hand, they're not really interested in revealing information about, for example, how their customers are moving money, because, for example, they're not interested in that. Might, for example, reveal the trading patterns of their big investors, for example, if it's an investment bank, or it might simply reveal transaction histories of their everyday users, which of course is also something that they're not interested in doing, because it's also sensitive information. And MPC, of course, can be used here for banks to, for example, ensure that they don't have certain very active accounts that spend a lot of time moving very big amounts of money between the banks, because that in some cases can be indication of fraud, while at the same time not revealing more than exactly this, that there is like somebody who's moving a lot of money. Of course, they can figure out these patterns by just sharing all their information between each other, but in practice, they're never going to do that.
Okay, so basically you're saying that MPC could be a supportive tool, for example, for AML, anti-money laundering mechanisms for banks and so on. And how does this compare to the existing anti-money laundering measures that the banks are taking? So why would this be superior to the existing? And I don't know, maybe this is too detailed into the banking sector, but I don't know if you have any thoughts about why.
No, I think I might have like an educated guess. I definitely don't want to claim any kind of expert knowledge on any money laundering or the inner workings of the financial system. But I imagine that as soon as they cannot share detailed transaction history between each other, then whatever analysis like a particular bank can do sort of ends at that bank's jurisdiction, which means that they may have certain customers who are actually engaging in illegal activities, but if you only look at, like, say, the trading patterns of this particular of these customers within a certain bank, then it doesn't look suspicious. It's only when you sort of get the bigger picture that it becomes suspicious. And if you never get this bigger picture, this, suspicion is never going to become clear. But again, I don't know exactly how it works. So
the way I think about it is that right. So if you consider transactions as a graph, right? So each customer is a node, right, and then the transaction is an edge towards another node, right? Then each time there is a transaction towards another bank, then the analysis basically stops, right? If you just do the analysis within your own jurisdiction.
Mm.
So when sort of being able to build this better graph and detecting cycles within the bigger graph without ever having to really construct it, but just check whether these cycles exist, well, then this is naturally a way stronger measure against money laundering.
Yeah. And then maybe, I know this is a dumb question, but since we're using advanced encryption and so on, and the data is not shared actually across the banks, can I actually, as a bank, trace who has done that specific transaction? How do I actually get to catch the fraudulent bank or user? Can I reverse the encryption in a way, or is it breakable? Or
so of course it's not breakable, but all the banks that participate in this hypothetical system that uses MPC to do any money laundering, they of course all agreed on a certain set of ground rules. They are all in agreement of what exactly they wish to accomplish. For example, like going back again, for example, using a blockchain to orchestrate this whole endeavor, right? And maybe one of these rules, and that probably makes sense, is that they do all of this analysis, so to speak, secretly on the transaction history of all the transactions in all the banks that participate in the system. And if they find someone who is in violation of whatever rules they put in place, for example, they're just making too many transfers just in like a circle, or it's taking too many loans at the different places and like cashing them in other banks or whatever, then they all agree to reveal the identity of this particular customer or accounts, or like the identity of these accounts, for the purpose, of course, to now be able to go to the authorities and say, we are quite certain that this person is doing something fishy. You really should look into it. Here's the information that allows the authorities to now go after this person. But this really, this of course requires them all to be in agreement of the rules about exactly when they do release information. And the neat thing about MPC is that you can sort of set up the system so that it's only if everybody is in agreement that this information will actually be revealed. So even if you have like one bank, for example, that gets their database hacked or decides to try to release private information about customers that they think are trading with a different bank for whatever reason, they won't actually be able to do it unless they get all the other banks on board. And typically that's of course a lot more difficult than just releasing whatever data you have yourself.
Yeah, so this is basically similar to the consensus mechanisms and that we have in blockchain technology. But then, if I may ask you, so what is the role of blockchain technology specifically here in the financial sector and banking applied to multi-party computation?
Yeah, well, so I think blockchain will actually play a very similar role to what Anders described before, right? Because if this multi-party computation is to be run, all the banks involved must agree on exactly what is run, when it's run. As otherwise, right? If any computation is run, then I can just make the computation reveal a lot of things, right? So we need to really agree and inspect the computations that are run before actually executing them. So this means that this must be written down in an order, and an immutable order, such that there can be no doubt about who said which bank suggested doing what at what time. Did everybody consent to it, and so on and so forth, right? And blockchain is just a natural tool to do exactly that, right? Yeah. We get an immutable order which can sort of a perfect audit log, also for the authorities to see that this has been done in the correct manner, right?
Yeah. So I think maybe a nice way to look at it is that blockchains decentralize operation for the sake of, say, transparency or immutability. Everybody agrees on what has happened and nobody can change what has happened. Whereas MPC sort of decentralize the operation of the system for the sake of privacy, in the sense that you split out data among multiple parties in such a way that no single one, for example, can see the actual data. So you sort of get like they each work with decentralization, and they each have like their own benefits that are sort of benefit each other.
Got it.
So you get sort of like what's it in biology? It's called I cannot remember what this is called, but it's basically the sum is greater than the parts in some sense. A synergistic system.
Yeah. But it seems that they complement really each other quite a lot, right? So having a traceable system and an immutable audit trail while being able to compute data in a secure, private, and fast way on top. So this can solve many issues it can support many industries basically where there is a lack of trust or a lot of data to be computed in a confidential way. So it seems that these two technologies complement each other very well. Then before moving into the Q&A, I would like to ask one last question. So what are the challenges here for multi-party computation adoption and PETs in general? We briefly touched upon the regulatory implications. What do you see the challenges for adoption or mass adoption here, for example?
So I think there's always the technical challenge. When you have to adopt any kind of technical system, there are some technical challenges involved. And of course, MPC or blockchain or a combination of the two is no difference there. It's always some obstacle to adopt a new system. But besides that, yes, there is, I think, the regulatory aspect, especially in like this more moving into like compliance with the privacy laws, for example. There is a little bit of like a chicken and egg problem in the sense that it's easier to get a stamp of approval, so to speak, for systems that have been used a lot, which means that a system that hasn't been used a lot cannot get this approval, but it sort of have to be used a lot before it can get the approval and so on. So it doesn't mean that it cannot be used, but it sort of means that there is maybe a little bit of a need for like some first movers, some adopters. And we are seeing that actually with MPC. There is a lot of like bigger players that are using MPC in more like limited fashions. It's being used for what's it called, like ad attribution, for example, by Google and by Facebook. I believe they have some systems that are using MPC like algorithms for this. It's being seen more and more, I would say, for healthcare applications. We have the one we mentioned, but there's also other companies in Europe who does MPC, not MPC in blockchains, but does MPC that have demonstrated its use in healthcare. So, and the more there are of those, the easier it becomes to adopt. Again, discounting, of course, any kind of technical challenges, which we'll never get rid of.
Of course. Sounds great.
Yeah, I think, well, I would actually say that the technology has really matured in the recent years, yes. Right? So we are actually at a point where I don't think this is sort of really an obstacle anymore. But I would rather say that the lack of awareness of these technologies makes it very difficult to orchestrate these computations, right? Because you actually need three different entities or multiple different entities, say banks, that understands the implications of participating in this, right? That they are not sending the data in clear text and so on. And this is not easy when the technology is a bit difficult to comprehend.
Bit novel in some sense, even if the research behind it is like 40 years old by now. But I mean, events like such as this, at least like
actually
webinars, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what is needed. There, opportunities for people like Søren and I to be exposed to the real world, I guess, in some sense, to talk about these technologies.
Yeah, and actually, if I move to the Q&A right now and I start reading some of the questions, one question was actually about that. So I can read that one question here that says, how do people read more about multi-party computation, and where do I start if I want to learn more about this technology?
So that's a good question. I like to believe
How did
there
you
is
start?
some...
Maybe how did you? Of course, you studied cryptography in university, so I guess that's a simple question for you. But for people who didn't study cryptography, is that how high is the barrier? Where can I start to learn from?
Yes, so I actually think that on understanding the technology at a sort of a really deep technical level is not really necessary, right? There you have people like Anders and I who can actually implement this and tell, I mean, to get this thing running. And so I think it's more important to understand it at a conceptual level, right? And there I think there are quite a few tutorials. I don't know, at least also on Partitia, we have some videos available where, among others, Ivan Damgaard, one of the
co-founders of Partitia,
co-founders, but also one of the sort of first, we'll call him an inventor of MPC somehow.
Pioneers
in the field, right?
Explains how it works.
Explain in really simple terms. So I think that's a good place to start.
Super. Yeah, thanks. And maybe you can share maybe later some links in the chat if you want, so people can go and read it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. I will move now to a more technical question here. Alex is asking, can Partisia support shielded tokens and their use in MPC computations? For example, I agree to share my data that comes from 2 databases, and for that I will be compensated with 1,000 kroner, according to some form of smart contract, and nobody can see that I've got 1,000 kroner.
So yes, I think there's like two what's it called? Problems to solve here in some sense. One is like you need to get some sort of compensation for your data being used in a computation. The other is that you want this computation to be, you want the size of the computation, so to speak, to be hidden from everybody else. For the first one, yes, of course. I mean, that's what Partisia blockchain does, which is like a team that has built like a public blockchain on top of some of the software, or we have delivered this software to them. So that one, for example, allows you to write a smart contract that says that if I provide correct input to this secure multi-party computation here, I will receive some sort of compensation. Then there is the fact of getting this compensation as a secure computation, hidden from everybody else. And that actually, you can also do. We had a proof of concept system we developed for the, what's it called? The International Committee of the Red Cross a couple of years back, which was sort of like this, a hidden token system. So as a system where you can give out tokens without revealing who actually receives them. And for them, it was a need of being able to pay out tokens that can be used for receiving aid of some sort, let's say food or whatever. But the ICRC, the Red Cross, they don't want to reveal who receives these tokens, because if I reveal that you receive, a certain amount of money that can be exchanged, or, tokens that can be exchanged for goods, then that suddenly makes you a target, especially in an area where law enforcement is probably subpar, because it's for some, it's some sort of like humanitarian catastrophe. So for them, we actually developed this like a private token system for them to use. So both can be done. Like one is basically what Partisia blockchain is doing. The other one we did for ICRC a couple of years back. So it's just a matter of, combining those two.
Yeah, well, but I mean, yeah, so you can build both on top of what Partitia blockchain is doing, right?
Yes.
So you really have the full toolbox available there. It's just sort of an explicit demonstration of this.
So they definitely can be done, but it actually has actually also been done.
Super. Thank you very much, guys. We are running towards the end. Actually, time is running out already. So I will just like to close down with one last question. Where do you see the future of multi-party computation and or PETs or zero knowledge proof, or how do you see this technology evolving in the next, for example, 5 to 10 years?
I think the future looks incredibly bright, like more bright than I guess the window here. I think there's a lot of super exciting stuff happening with these privacy enhancing technologies, like ID systems, for example,
right?
In the EU. So I guess I don't know if you have like a comment on that, since you're more.
Yeah, no. So I think in general there's a very positive move in the society towards being more privacy aware, right? And it's at this point it's kind of clear that this way of just sharing all of our information with very few big vendors, that is no longer a feasible path to continue on. So there we will have to look for alternatives, and multi-party computation poses such alternative right now. So I think this is not the last thing we will hear about multi-party computation.
Thank you very much. And with this last answer, I would like to thank you for joining, and thank you everyone for listening in. I can see already some links to go deep dive into PETs and multi-party computations here in the chat. So thank you for today, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.